Have you ever wondered why Thanksgiving carries such power before God? Gratitude is more than appreciation. It opens the heart and positions us to receive the promises of God. Stay with me as we discover how Thanksgiving unlocks the promise and transforms our walk with God.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into a really fascinating piece of source material, a profound August 2026 sermon by Pastor Adegoke O. Omotunde. We're going to explore how this text takes the whole concept of Thanksgiving and just completely flips it on its head. We're moving way beyond seeing gratitude as just some polite habit or a religious formality. Instead, we're going to look at how this sermon actually frames it as a reality-altering spiritual power. Here's our roadmap for today's Explainer. 1. The spiritual force. 2. Wonders of Thanksgiving. 3. Showers of blessings. And 4. Practicing true gratitude. Section 1. The spiritual force and the mystery of the missing 9. So, the sermon actually builds its whole foundation on this really mysterious story from Luke chapter 17. It highlights a pretty striking ratio, 10 to 1. 10 lepers cried out to Jesus for mercy, and all 10 were miraculously cleansed of their disease as they walked away. But out of those 10, only one single individual recognized the obligation of gratitude and actually returned to the healer. And this sets up the central mystery of the sermon by posing Christ's provocative question, where are the 9? The text points out this wild aspect of human nature. The 9 thoroughly enjoyed the gift, but they completely forgot the giver. They got so wrapped up in their new, healed condition that they just neglected the one who actually changed that condition in the first place. Because of this story, the text completely redefines Thanksgiving. It's not framed as a mere emotional response, just being happy when things go right. Instead, it's defined as a dynamic spiritual force. It's an active expression of faith that deliberately recognizes, remembers, and responds to the divine. Pastor Omotunde argues that this creates a crucial distinction in outcomes. Think about it. The ungrateful 9 received a physical intervention. Sure, they were cleansed, but the grateful one? He received total holistic restoration. What Thanksgiving did for him went far beyond that original miracle, leading Jesus to declare that his faith had made him entirely whole. Section 2, Wonders of Thanksgiving and Altering Spiritual Atmospheres. So what exactly are these specific wonders that gratitude activates? Well, first off, the sermon explains that gratitude fundamentally shifts how a person prays. It literally purifies prayer. Instead of approaching a problem with desperate anxiety or panicked begging, Thanksgiving reminds the believer that they are in confident fellowship with a Father who has faithfully provided before. It shifts the entire atmosphere from panic straight into faith. This brings us to one of my absolute favorite contrasts in the text, a thermometer versus a thermostat. Think about immature complaining for a second. It acts just like a thermometer. It simply reports a bad situation, matching the temperature of the room. But mature Thanksgiving, that acts like a thermostat. It doesn't just read the room, it actively introduces a totally new spiritual atmosphere to change the temperature of the situation. Building on that, the text uses this beautiful metaphor of palm and cedar trees from Psalm 92. These trees can survive incredibly hostile conditions because they keep their roots tapped deep into a water source. The sermon argues that believers operate the exact same way. By staying rooted in gratitude, they secure divine fresh oil, and that's what allows them to flourish and grow even in the most difficult, hostile environments. Now, timing is absolutely crucial here. Looking at the story of Lazarus, a man who had been dead for 4 days, the text emphasizes a key detail. Jesus thanked the Father before the tomb was ever opened, while the situation still looked entirely hopeless. The theological argument here is that Thanksgiving must precede the miracle. It's the spark that quickens dead situations. Let's jump into Section 3, Showers of Blessings and Covenant Channels for Divine Favor. Based on the promises in Ezekiel chapter 34, the sermon transitions from individual miracles to sustained blessings, outlining 5 specific keys. These are presented as covenant channels required to unlock continuous showers of blessings, rather than just catching isolated drops of favor. Let's look a bit closer at a couple of these, starting with the obedience of faith. Using a really powerful pivot, the sermon points out a common contradiction. While many believers deeply desire the incredible blessings given to Abraham, they actively resist the costly obedience that Abraham demonstrated in Genesis 22. The text argues that faith isn't proven by what is shouted during a service, but by what is actually obeyed when that obedience gets difficult. When exploring the key of acceptable stewardship, the text stresses that believers shouldn't sit around waiting for extreme wealth or perfect circumstances to serve. Stewardship means using your current time, your current finances, and your current influence right now. It is all about prioritizing God's agenda and kingdom advancement over personal gain, using whatever you currently hold in your hands. And that brings us to Section 4, practicing true gratitude and practical expressions of faith. So, how does this deep theology build into our daily practice? Well, the text outlines 5 very tangible actions. First, remember deliberately, like physically keeping a written record of answered prayers so you don't forget. Then it moves through speaking gratefully, giving generously, and serving faithfully. Finally, it culminates in praising joyfully, which is noted as a deliberate sacrifice, especially when you offer it during times of disappointment. The sermon makes a really bold promise here. It says that maintaining these 5 habits ensures you are never permanently cut off from divine direction. Why? Because a thankful heart quiets internal panic. It cuts through the noise of anxiety, and it restores a person's spiritual sensitivity to God's path, ensuring they can never remain permanently stranded. We're going to conclude this explainer by circling right back to where we started, leaving you with one final provocative question to challenge your daily walk. When the blessings flow and the interventions happen in your life, are you going to leave your gratitude behind like the missing 9? Or will you be the one who returns, carrying this dynamic spiritual force into your everyday life? We often approach prayer like we're reading off a grocery list of anxieties. We rehearse the exact magnitude of our problems, detailing our fears, our financial stress, and our physical ailments to a God we sometimes address as if he's a complete stranger who has never helped us before. And when we finally finish detailing those problems, we usually tack a quick thank you onto the very end. We treat gratitude as a polite sign-off, a bit of religious etiquette necessary to conclude the transaction and hopefully secure what we want. In the biblical account of Luke 17, 10 men suffering from leprosy stood at a distance and cried out to Jesus for mercy. He instructed them to go show themselves to the priests, and as they walked, all 10 experienced a complete physical cleansing. They got exactly what they asked for. But assuming the story ends there misses the actual mechanics of what happened next. Treating Thanksgiving as a mere polite reaction to answered prayer leaves an immense, active spiritual power untapped. Out of those 10 men who received the exact same physical healing, only one stopped, turned around, and publicly acknowledged the source of that healing. The other 9 enjoyed the gift, forgot the giver, and kept walking. That single decision created 2 wildly different outcomes. Jesus noted that the 9 received a temporary intervention, a physical cleansing of their immediate condition. But to the one who returned, he declared that his faith had made him whole, marking a complete restoration. The physical act of returning completed the miracle. By coming back to give thanks, the leper moved beyond physical healing to receive a spiritual wholeness that the 9 who kept walking never accessed. Gratitude acts as the catalyst that turns a physical intervention into a total restoration of the person's life and spirit. We can see how this works by looking at 2 common devices that might exist in the exact same room. A thermometer's only job is to passively report the ambient temperature. If the room is freezing, it simply reflects that reality. This is exactly what happens when we make complaining the dominant language of our lives, simply reporting on every bad circumstance. A thermostat possesses a completely different capability. It overrides the environment, radiating its own internal energy to force the external conditions to match its predetermined setting. This is the exact mechanism of mature thanksgiving. It does not require you to pretend the pain or the problem doesn't exist. Instead, it injects a new spiritual atmosphere into a hostile environment, refusing to let the crisis become larger in your mind than God's past faithfulness. You do not wait for the situation to improve so you can offer thanks. You use thanksgiving as the instrument to force that improvement. History provides clear evidence of this chronological sequence. In the book of Acts, Paul and Silas were beaten, fastened in wooden stocks, and locked in a dark prison cell. They didn't wait for a rescue to start praising. They actively sang praises at midnight, generating a spiritual force that literally shook the prison's foundations and broke their chains before any physical rescue arrived. We see the exact same sequence in the account of Lazarus. The man had been dead for 4 days. The stone was sealed, the body was decomposing, and the mourners had accepted the loss. Yet Jesus stood at the tomb and deliberately thanked God out loud before he ever called Lazarus out of the grave. This proactive gratitude functions like a deep root system. In Psalm 92, a flourishing believer is compared to a cedar in Lebanon. These trees don't survive because Boaz-the-Rezo is perfect. They thrive in rugged, rocky environments because their roots reach deep water. When yesterday's energy is depleted by frustration or a hostile environment, Thanksgiving acts as a fuel source. It provides what the psalmist calls fresh oil, renewing a believer's spiritual strength and preventing exhaustion from having the final word. Thanksgiving logically has to precede the miracle. It is the energetic force that speaks into dead situations and calls the impossible into existence. Activating this force requires highly specific daily actions. The first step is deliberately keeping a written record of past victories. The human brain is incredibly quick to forget past mercies the moment a new threat appears, and a physical record becomes concrete evidence you can rely on during a crisis. That internal shift has to be paired with behavioral changes. It means actively eliminating complaint as the default vocabulary in your home. It means giving generously of your resources and finding ways to serve faithfully so that you become a channel for someone else's blessing. This culminates in what we call kingdom advancement. When you prioritize external spiritual goals, like supporting the expansion of the gospel and serving the vulnerable, over your own personal panic, you secure divine backing. Your outward-flowing actions generate an inward-flowing multiplication of your own resources. This alignment requires more than a fleeting internal emotion. It demands the tangible, physical actions and strategic discipline of a life rooted in stewardship. This discipline is tested most severely during the waiting period. When a medical report is delayed or a financial strain drags on, it is easy to assume the silence is a denial. But that delay is frequently a necessary period of preparation, where both the environment and your own character are being forged for the outcome. This is why you must carry this form of gratitude outside the walls of the church. It is designed to be deployed directly into your most hostile personal environments, your most uncertain career transitions, and your most painful waiting periods. When fear predicts a catastrophic defeat, you have to actively answer that prediction with the concrete evidence of God's past faithfulness. When discouragement tells you nothing will ever change, you recite the battles already won. You have a choice in how you navigate the challenges ahead. You can spend your energy passively reporting the temperature of your circumstances, or you can start actively setting it. Many people treat God like a spiritual emergency room. They call out into the dark during a sudden night of affliction, desperately asking for help. But the moment the morning of deliverance arrives and the crisis passes, they continue their journey, entirely forgetting the one who brought them through. We have a conventional timeline for gratitude. An event happens, a good outcome is achieved, and a polite thank you is offered as a reaction at the very end. You can see this transactional mindset in the biblical account of Luke 17. 10 men suffering from leprosy cry out to Jesus, begging for mercy. Jesus instructs them to go show themselves to the priests, and as they walk away, all 10 men are completely cleansed of their disease. But here is the behavioral anomaly. Out of those 10 men who received a life-altering miracle, only one of them turns around to offer thanks. Jesus notices the math. He asks a pointed question. Where are the 9? The 9 men celebrated their new condition and enjoyed the gift, yet they neglected the healer who provided it. Look at the difference in their outcomes. The 9 men received a physical cleansing, but Jesus tells the one man who returned that his faith has made him whole. He receives total, complete restoration that goes beyond the original miracle. This raises a question about the mechanics of the Spirit. What is the structural mechanism of thanksgiving that takes a temporary intervention and transforms it into permanent, total restoration? to understand that mechanism, we have to look at how we measure our circumstances. Passive gratitude acts like a thermometer. It sits in a room and merely reports the temperature of a situation after it has already happened. Proactive thanksgiving operates like a thermostat. It influences the room. It sets the spiritual atmosphere of a situation, introducing a specific frequency that overrides the existing conditions. The first way this mechanism works is by quickening dead situations. Take the case of Jesus and Lazarus in the Gospel of John. Lazarus has been dead in a tomb for 4 days. Decomposition has begun, and the mourners have fully accepted the loss. But look at the timing Jesus chooses. He doesn't roll away the stone and then give thanks for the miracle. He stands in front of a closed tomb, while Lazarus is still dead inside, and gives thanks to the Father before anything changes. This timing reveals that thanksgiving is an expression of faith. It is a declaration that refuses to accept the finality of a painful situation before God has declared it permanently dead. This pattern demonstrates that proactive gratitude positions the believer for a resurrection or a breakthrough. It creates the environment where God can complete what he has begun. The second mechanism involves securing fresh oil. The reality is, surviving yesterday's crisis does not provide the fuel needed for today's ongoing responsibilities. Complaining exhausts your inner strength, leaving your spirit heavy and your vision narrow. Thanksgiving acts as a replenishment system, renewing your inner capacity even when the external challenge is still present. This constant replenishment allows a person to grow even in restrictive or hostile environments. It is the system Joseph used to endure betrayal, prosper in a foreign land, and remain fruitful even while locked inside an Egyptian prison. The third mechanism is how gratitude facilitates prophecy and prayer. In the book of Acts, Paul and Silas are beaten, humiliated, and locked in wooden stocks. They don't wait for the prison doors to open before they start praising. At midnight, while still chained to the floor, they sing. Thanking God for previous answers purifies the way you ask for future interventions. It shifts your emotional state from desperate panic to confident faith, reminding you that the God you are approaching has delivered you before. But accessing these mechanisms requires specific inputs. Verbal gratitude must be paired with the obedience of faith, acting on instruction when that obedience is costly. It also requires acceptable stewardship, using your time, resources, and influence to serve others. Carry active thanksgiving out of religious settings directly into your home and your workplace and your waiting periods. When fear attempts to predict a defeat, you must intercept it. Answer that fear by stating the specific evidence of the protections, provisions, and open doors God has already provided. Habitual thanksgivers are rarely stranded. Because gratitude quiets internal anxiety, it restores your spiritual sensitivity, allowing you to clearly perceive direction for your next step, even when the entire journey remains hidden. Thanksgiving maintains a direct connection to God's presence. It ensures that even in the darkest waiting periods, the believer never navigates the path of life alone.